Hello. I just got an email. I think that we may end up getting postponed, but to another time. But let me double. Hi there.
Hello, how's it going?
Doing well. I hope you are too.
I am. This is my first meeting. Interested to see how it goes.
The problem is, I think I was in another meeting and I just saw an email slide across saying, "Hey, I think we need to postpone 2 weeks." So
Yeah,
so
that.
my apologies if that's going to be your experience.
No, I think that's totally fine. No, I was so I work with Axe, and he was like, I don't know if this is happening or not today. So I already knew. So it's all right if we
Ah.
want to.
Okay, I'm actually not the TAC lead, so I will do my best to throw him under the bus. So okay, so Ryan, let's see here. We won't be having a meeting on July 27th. That's today. So we are going to have more agenda items next. Okay, all righty. Um, Okay, Drat. Oh, look. Okay, you know what? I see some other folks here. Let me. Ryan. So I saw your post that you're canceling this meeting, and here you are anyway.
Oh, when I didn't send a post canceling the meeting.
You didn't?
No.
Last
Where did
week.
you see that?
Let's see here. We won't be having. Oh, wait a minute. It's security tooling,
Oh,
whose name
Ryan
is
Ware.
also
Yes.
Ryan. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm so glad that I showed up anyway.
Me too. I was like, wait a minute. Not to
You, you,
mention that, again, I cannot get this password thing to work. I apparently have set everything up correctly, but it does not start the meeting for me. So I'm glad you are here to do it.
okay, the TAC meeting is I'm going to post to the tooling folks right now. I don't know very many people named Ryan, and so I just saw 4 letters and all that stuff. So let me send out an email just to make sure anybody who's on the tooling list is taking place now.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, it's funny. I've never really, in all my professional career, 20 plus years, have ever really worked with another Ryan on a team. My previous team, there were 3 of us.
Okay. All right. So I'm posting right now. So hopefully that will reduce the confusion. So my apologies, and I'm glad I'm here. And I just posted to the tooling group so that perhaps that will prevent that confusion anyway.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. It does look like a few people are still joining, so we'll give him a few more minutes. So hopefully there wasn't too much confusion. But I know anytime I get an email from him and I see Ryan and it's from OpenSSF, I'm like, wait, I didn't send anything.
No.
I will say people wonder why you use my middle initial, but I used to work at a company where there were 2 David Wheelers,
Oh,
and
wow.
that does not the confusion ensues. I once got some medical stuff and went, "This is not for me." So, so anything written, I try to use my middle initial because it can be chaos otherwise.
Well, I've definitely never worked with another Ryan Haining, so I can't, that would be pretty unique. Okay, I think we got a good chunk of people now, so we'll kind of just hit up on the agenda real quick. So at the meeting notes in here, please go ahead and add yourselves in there for me when you have a chance. And we have a few things on the agenda. So of course I emailed David yesterday asking if he could present because we didn't have much else to discuss, and then immediately got more things to discuss. So, so there's 3 main things that we want to talk about today. First is the vote on the OSTIF budget. And then secondly, Kay is going to give a presentation on supply chain security and the executive order and kind of some viewpoints from that and how it might dovetail with OpenSSF. And then David, that I've requested to discuss his process for security work. So I think we should be able to squeeze all that in today. It shouldn't be too bad. So if folks remember from our previous meeting that was about a month ago, because we did miss the last one, the original budget request from OSTF was significantly more than the funds that are available in OpenSSF. And so we had them go back and redo their proposal with the funds that we actually have available, which is 60,000 instead of the, I think, 2.8 million or something like that it was originally. And so they sent a proposal to the TAC mailing list. If you haven't seen that, I can forward it again. But this is a quick summary of it. And basically, what they're saying is that with the 60,000, they're going to dedicate their resources towards completing an end-to-end review of Symfony. And for those of you that are not familiar with Symfony, it's basically, it's a popular component or open source component used in PHP frameworks. So it's fairly prevalent and it has a lot of security functions built into it. So it's kind of important to get some security reviews and eyes on that. And then they've also shown that they do have a number of CVEs that could be fixed through better testing. So actually putting their resources towards this effort towards this particular project would actually have a pretty good kind of bang for the buck, if you will. And then this in combination with funding that they have from other sources such as Google and a couple other sponsors, they can get, I think, 9 out of the 10 projects, and then they're looking to add a 10th project soon. So to kind of complete the full proposal that they had initially. So this is their current proposal for OpenSSF. I believe Dan Lawrence has already voted to say that he approved. There might have been one others. I apologize, I'm super behind on email from being out of the office for a little while. But if folks can reply to those threads today with voting, or we can go ahead and do what we've done in the past with other ones where we create an issue on GitHub and let people approve it that way. Either way, we can do that. So we can take votes now if we have quorum. I'm not sure if we have everybody. I see Rao. I know Dan's already voted. Phil's here. I think that would give us, if Rao, Phil, and myself vote yes, we can approve this, but not to put anybody on the spot.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to catch up on the emails, right? I'm good with this approach. My only question there is there any reason we're going with the number 8 rather than what happened to the 1 to 7, right? Is that 60,000 not enough, or what's the rationale though? I'm just curious on that one.
Oh, it was basically based on, they have this sorted list, right, where they've looked at the criticality scores and a number of other factors. So they're looking at the criticality score, but they're also looking at like what's the most value for that amount of money of the amount of effort they can put in to a particular project. And so looking at their sorted list, they decided that for that amount of effort, this project would receive the most benefit. And so that's why they chose it.
Yeah, so it's like a most bang for the buck kind of approach. Okay. Yeah,
Exactly.
I'm good with it.
Yep.
I approve.
Cool.
All right, so that was a vote yes, Rao. Vote Ryan. From your tone, I'm assuming you're yes.
Confirmed, I am yes as well. Yes.
Okay. Do we have another for those who are actually on the TAC?
Yeah, I can. I just found the email thread. I actually thought I had said approve at some point, but I did not. So I'll respond to the thread.
Perfect. Thank you, Phil. So it sounds like that is approved, and that is wonderful. So we can get kind of rolling on that.
Ryan, I think formally you have to send it up to the GB, and I think K is on. So
Yeah, but I will send it.
so watch out, K incoming.
I will do
All right, we will, for this one, we're close to the governing board meeting, which is next Thursday. So it might be easiest to just we'll have a vote for it at the governing board meeting.
Okay, so but Ryan, I'm guessing you're going to post to the governing board the decision today, so that governing board will have time to think about it.
Yes, I will do that today.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent. Okay, our next agenda item is with Kay. So for her presentation, I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
All right, I'm going to note here, TAC voted and approved.
So thank you, David.
Yay.
Usual,
Well, Ryan will
There's a
send to
bit-
governing board. All right.
Okay, let me get
I
shared.
don't have to record individual votes, do I? I mean,
no, it's
I'm gonna
fine.
assume no. So
Yeah, we did record the meeting, so it's documented in that form at least.
great, even better.
Okay. Okay, so this is a deck, and I actually shared this with the OpenSSF Planning Committee yesterday, so some of you will have seen this, but not everyone. And Ryan said he was looking for content, and I said, well, I've got something I could share. And we might, after we look at this and think about it, we might decide it would be interesting to create another working group in OpenSSF. So this deck covers the US White House executive order on cybersecurity. It also covers software bill of materials, and then a proposed industry approach to supply chain integrity. And I'll kind of launch through this. Is it based on, it covers certainly some thinking that we've been having at Microsoft, but we're very interested in this not being a Microsoft proposal, but something that's the community all gets behind. So we'll start off, we'll talk about the executive order, software bill of materials, and then industry approach. So for the executive order, many of you may be familiar with that, so I'll probably go through this quickly, but if you do have questions, feel free to jump in at any time and I'll slow down and address. So the executive order covers a number of things. There are 11 total sections in it. And for this, we're going to be focusing on section 4, which has to do with enhancing software supply chain security. In a recent NIST workshop, one of the speakers there gave this quote, and this kind of summarizes what the executive order is getting at. We're not here to tell you how to build your software, but we're here to tell you which software we're willing to buy. So this is about procurement of software, the US government's procurement of software and the requirements that they'll be putting forward. So key dates, and these are specific to section 4 of the executive order. Several of these dates, the first 4 of them on this, actually 5 of them now on this timeline, are in the past. So the order was introduced in May of mid-May, and initially the government was soliciting input. David Wheeler provided some input from the Linux Foundation. Microsoft, and I'm sure other companies here also provided information. The government is now reviewing that and is coming back with some, further refining what they laid out in the executive order based on this input and their own deliberations. The next big dates coming up in November, we should get a preliminary guidelines from the Department of Homeland Security for the requirements for providers of software. In February, they should have their final guidelines out, and then just 30 days from that, in March, the government agencies will be required to comply with those requirements. So it's a really short timeline overall, kind of 10 months from start to finish, and from now to finish is only about 6 months. I should be more careful when I say finish. Finish means, the government sees this as an ongoing process. So they'll pick some set that they start with, some set of software, some set of security requirements, but they envision that the set of software will become broader and the security requirements will become broader over time. So section 4E deals with security requirements for specifically with security requirements for software procurement. And those include things like using secure development environments, maintaining trusted source code supply chains, checking and remediating vulnerabilities. I won't go through all of these, providing an SBOM, conforming with some sort of security software development practice. So those are the, the set of things that they're requirements that they're looking to request conformance with. This is the same on the left-hand side. This is the same list from the prior slide. So there are the requirements, and then also they're requesting evidence to demonstrate conformance with the requirements. So, and what I have listed here on the right-hand side is what was described in the EO initially. And, again, we're looking for some future guidance to come out, in the November and the February timeframes. So for, for example, for checking and remediating vulnerabilities, they're looking for artifacts of tools and processes that were executed, and then also publicly managed or making available a summary of risks assessed and mitigated for the software. For the requirement to provide an SBOM, the evidence in this case is the SBOM for conformance with security software development practices. What they had listed as an attestation, but there might be more evidence needed beyond just an attestation that says I conformed with some SDL process. So that's an overview of the, what's in the executive order and, how we think about these requirements and the evidence needed to demonstrate conformance.
Kay, if I can interrupt on that
Bet.
previous slide. Yeah, Kay and I talked earlier that ended up with that long text in the header at the top because the executive order is, of course, very high level, and not only exactly what's going to be required, but the evidence required. I think at least my expectation is we're going to get more information as they refine it.
Right. I totally agree.
Thanks.
Okay, so now let's talk about software bills of materials, and SPDX is one of the formats that can be used to satisfy the production of a software bill of materials. The other two are Cyclone DX and
SWID.
SWID, thank you. I knew it started with an S.
I'm surprised that didn't come to the tip of your tongue.
Yeah, I know. So what is a software bill of materials according to the NDIA? It's a machine readable inventory of software components. Information about the components and the relationships, including hierarchical relationships or the full tree of dependencies. And the NTIA stands for National Telecommunications and Information Agency, something like that. And they've listed a minimum set of elements that are required for an SBOM. This is, we certainly from Microsoft perspective, we think this is a low bar. Actually, maybe they said it this way, so I won't say Microsoft perspective, but NTIA is setting a low bar for broad adoption and enabling vulnerability assessment and integrity. So the use case is vulnerability assessment and integrity checking. So why are they important? Again, it's not only about vulnerability checking, but it's in part about vulnerability checking. And the key for vulnerability checking is the ability to identify software so that vulnerabilities can be associated with software. And the software, can come in many shapes and sizes. It might be code that's in a source code database. It might be some packaged code. And by packaged, I mean, developer packaging. So in a PyPy package or NPM or NuGet or it might be, software that was used in an end product. So when we think about the executive order requirements, we think of software bills of materials as the seed. So, and the seed is, again, understanding the identity and composition of software. So that's really what the SBOM is about, but it also allows association of other claims or other evidence. So again, back on the slide where we talked about security requirements and evidence, software bill of materials is kind of the core, and then all of those other pieces of evidence that need to be provided would identify that those were performed against software that's identified using the software bill of materials. So David and others who were in the talk yesterday, I also included some, in that one, I included some additional information about SPDX. I'll mention that here. I don't happen to have slides. So SPDX is one of the formats that can be used. Microsoft is looking to use SPDX 2.2 for providing our software bill of materials. We are looking to certainly provide SBOMs for the software that's identified by the government as critical software, or the software that must be handled by March. But over time, we're planning to provide software bill of materials for all of our software and all of our services. It'll just take time to work through that. Okay, so now I'll move on to, unless there are questions on any of that. Now we'll move on to what, and again, this is, I'm framing it the way we're thinking about it at Microsoft, but we'd love for to collaborate with others and come up with an industry approach. So, broaden the way we're thinking or make changes to requirements, etc. Here's an overview. So we see the kind of the base parts of supply chain integrity as the following. One is that there's a supply chain data store, and I'll describe each of these elements in more detail later. The supply chain data store, is where things like evidence and policy go. But in this workflow, some organization creates a supply chain data store. Then the next piece of the workflow, number 2, is a policy manager. So, someone whose job it is to say, for my organization or for my software project, I'll only accept software components that meet a certain set of requirements. So the policy manager defines the requirements using policy and then submits that policy, which is a document, signs it and submits it to the data store where it's logged and it can be queried and retrieved by others. So step 3, a supplier creates a product. Could be anything, could be source code, could be a packaged software product, could be a cloud service. At Microsoft, we even think of this very broadly. We're looking at a model that encompasses hardware, software, machine learning data sets, and even digital media, so images and videos, etc. Anyway, so supplier creates a product and then provides evidence about what work was done for that product to meet requirements, whether those be internal requirements or external. And then that evidence is also signed and then submitted to the data store. And then the last piece of it is the user. The user retrieves evidence. They retrieve the policy that the evidence is supposed to meet. They retrieve the product, and then they verify using the product and the evidence that the policy was satisfied. So that's the high level overview of the model. Let me stop there and see if there are any questions. I have another slide that we'll do next, which kind of shows how we're thinking about this, again, at a high level for the executive order. Any questions?
A question on the policy manager. I think we briefly chatted the other day.
Yeah.
What if we have multiple policies? So are we intended to get user all the policies, supplier upload for all the policies? Like, is there a hierarchy?
Yeah, so I don't cover that in this slide, but I can talk to that. So we actually think that this happens at multiple levels. So if you take this particular drawing, you might imagine that all of this is happening just inside of an organization. So maybe JPMC has one setup that looks something like this, and Microsoft has something like this, and possibly any open source project, although this would be heavyweight for an individual open source project. Maybe you'd imagine, well, anyway, so I think there's this local scope, and there can be policies and suppliers and users at the local scope. And they might have a data store, a local scope data store. And then there's also kind of a broader scope, and maybe it's a global scope. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. Maybe you think about this kind of like the DNS system, where you can have local DNS, and this is the set of information that's exchanged locally. And then there can be a global DNS, and possibly information that's in that local store could get pushed to a global one, or possibly the ones that are managed locally, some part of it could become federated. Those are some of the things that we want to define as time goes on.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to mention, I mean, no questions really, but like this is like a very relevant topic. I'm a security researcher at Sonatype, and also with us Sal Kimmich today with us from Sonatype. So, we've also collaborated with NTI in the past. So like any way we can help, because literally if you see my blog post over the last year, right, it's been all about like technical, not maybe so high level, but
Right.
all about like supply chain infections and malware.
Right. Yeah, great. And I'm thinking, and we'll talk about this later, maybe we want to create a working group inside of OpenSSF. But let's talk. Okay, so now if we think about the executive order, and now I get into this, concept of more of a global supply chain. So in this diagram, let's think about an industry consortium creates a distributed supply chain data store. And I'm not describing, where that consortium is, but, maybe it's in an open source project, maybe like the OpenSSF, maybe it's, something that's handled through, some other industry standards body, not sure. But imagine for a moment that there's some sort of distributed supply chain data store. And in this case, what might happen is that the US government, you might think of them as a policy manager, and they would submit a policy to the data store. It might not be for lots of reasons about how the US government works, it might not be the US government that submits something, but maybe someone else creates this schematized policy that identifies that maps one-to-one with the EO requirements, but this policy would also be available from a data store. And then imagine that OSS developers would submit evidence for their source code to this data store. And maybe it's not OSS developers doing anything explicitly, maybe it's happening under the covers. So maybe the OSS developer is using GitHub or GitLab or some other SCM, and there's some feature provided by the SCM that says automatically provide evidence about EO conformance to a data store. This could play out in a lot of different ways, but I'm just kind of, and I'm hand waving some of those for now, just focusing on the flow of information. So the OSS developer in some way submits evidence to this global store. Their source code is used by some company, which is part of ingesting that source code, does a verification test against, using the evidence and the policy that's in this global store, then they create their own packaged software, and then the packaged software goes to the US government. And again, they can check the evidence and policy from some global store. When I talk with our CEO at Microsoft, by the way, he doesn't think there'll be a global store. He thinks it will all be distributed. So companies would have their own, and so in fact, you know, company A would be going to company B to get the data from them. Again, you know, these things are all, this is an early conceptualization and stuff we would need to sort out. I made about a dozen or more caveats as I walked through this, at least. Questions? Okay. So then as we think about how to, you know, how would we go through, you know, refining this and actually delivering something, you know, we think the big picture mission, individuals and organizations can produce and consume trustworthy products across end-to-end supply chains. And then we've been thinking about the guiding principles as this needs to be an industry collaborative effort. So we don't think any one organization can do this alone, similar to how we think about, you know, why we all came together under OpenSSF. We think it needs to be both, we need industry standards, which is kind of a slower, longer term process. And we also need fast iteration. So we, you know, we Microsoft certainly have been active in some industry standards projects around supply chain security. We know there are others who are, and you know, kind of an ethos for open source is that running code and rough consensus and running code. And so, you know, we want to have a world where both things are happening. There's rough consensus, running code, you know, trying things, and then all of that, you know, accrues to some industry standards as we go along. And you know, essentially the standards part is just so that we can have that smooth flow of information, standard schemas for submitting data, for submitting policy, for querying data, that, you know, the standards are the things that enable a lot of that. We also think this, you know, in order to be broadly accepted, we think there, you know, a lot of it's open source. So, you know, even the data stores should have open source implementations. There should be tools, there should be client libraries. In the way we've been thinking about it, because we want this same model for all of the software and IoT devices and all of the hardware that we produce from Microsoft. We want this to be a general model inclusive of all product types. But we do think software is the starting place for it. Automation is a key piece of this. So, you know, the evidence should be generated in the background. That's kind of gets to the next bullet. So the user experience should be the right thing happens generally in the background. It shouldn't require, certainly for developers, it shouldn't require, you know, manual creation of evidence. The tools that they use should create that evidence. And then there should be user experiences for creating policy, and the verification should be built into tools that people are using. And then to, you know, ensure that this data and policy flow through the system and people can trust it. Concepts that we're looking for guarantees of trust include distributed identity, transparency, non-repudiability of the data in the store. The data should be tamper-proof. And then something that we've been looking at from Microsoft is that the store should be guaranteed by a hardware root of trust, because that's the, you know, the kind of the industry standard gold star for roots of trust. But that's, you know, also something that we can talk about. Is just we've been looking a lot at using confidential compute technologies for the store. All right, anything there? So in this model, we think there's some standards around evidence, so data model and exchange format for providing evidence about products. The software bill of materials the NTIA is not picking a favorite. Again, there's SWID and SPDX and Cyclone DX. The way that we've been thinking about it is that, over the longer run, we'd like to have and I equate this to the email model. We'd like to have there be kind of a base standard, but then it can be extended, a base standard for data, but then other data formats could be used. So when I go back to the email model, in email, you can have different content types. So email can come, text is one model, then there's HTML and RTF and other, other types of content can be an email in an email message. So we'd like there to be a base that gets extended over time, so that when we're querying, so you can do rich queries, like I can say, when I'm querying the data store, I can say for a certain software component, tell me all of the evidence that's related to that software component. And that's easiest to do if there's a common evidence data model. So also for policy, we're looking for a data model and exchange format. And then for the data store, we're looking at a service definition and API. So how do I query for data? How do I enter data into the system? How do I query for data that's in the system? How do I retrieve it? All of those things would be defined in the data store API. And then there also would be requirements for functionality of the data store. So again, distributed identity management, how the, anyway, I won't go through all of these. So those are some of the standards that we're looking to have created. This is not a new concept. So, and in fact, I think probably a lot of companies might have done their own implementation, something like this internally. Microsoft has probably 10 different internal implementations of something like this. The key point here is to try to get people all doing it in a similar way so we can exchange. Related products are the Intoto project, and Intoto kind of deals with supply chain evidence and policy. They use different terms. They use metadata and supply chain layouts. Sigstore looks at distributed identity and then also evidence signing, in particular source code signing. Salsa is another project, and they're looking at policy for supply chain based on the criticality of software, and then also the verification of policy using evidence. And then there are the other SPDX, Cyclone DX, SWID, and others that are existing data formats. And so, all of these we think kind of play parts in the overall. And if we, if all of us are coordinating across all of these, we can be accruing to the larger vision. And then that's the last slide that I had, and just an open question about next steps. Some ideas that we've had. So there is, I'll just mention a little more to, I've been talking theoretical as we've been going along, but to make it a little more tangible, I'll mention that Microsoft and some others, MITRE and a group out of Germany that works on standards, and some folks from Qualcomm and Cisco have been having some meetings where we're starting to work through some of these proposed standards that I mentioned. But even more than working through the standards, we do have an implementation that we're working on. And it's based on our implementation is based on a framework called the Confidential Consortium Framework. I can provide that in the chat a little bit later. And that is open source, the code is open sourced, both what's the documentation for it and the code is open sourced from Microsoft. And then this supply chain, what we're calling the supply chain integrity model, or SCIM, is some additional features based on top of CCF, and we're intending to make that open source. And we're also looking to provide, and this is early and not completely confirmed, but early thinking is that Microsoft would provide a cloud service that would be this data store. And we could use that for our own internal uses, and customers could use it for theirs if that's something that they're interested in. We're, for our own internal use, we don't yet have a version of the store that we're testing against, but we think that we'll have that in the next couple of weeks. So it's coming along. And I think that's all that I have to describe about that. So let me open up now for other questions, or are we interested in having a working group in OpenSSF? We could have a working group that, we could look at a couple of ways to do this. There could be a working group that's focused on the broader supply chain integrity scope. We could have one that focuses just on the executive order.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to jump in on that. I really enjoyed this. This was, thank you. I mean, I tried to do that whole thing, but I haven't seen it crystallized so well so far. Yeah, I mean, my background on this is I have been focusing and pretty interested in what the changes to the supply chain, particularly in the sort of more global sense of open source looks like. I just wrote a Hacker Noon post exactly on this last week.
Okay.
I would love, I mean, I can definitely pull from that perspective. There's a couple of things that I think are really worth sort of pulling on threads for. And one of them is actually really particularly sort of the data store and the querying of that, because beyond just collecting and storing and doing that efficiently, what that's actually going to allow you or us as a community to do is develop a security taxonomy, which is hugely valuable, right?
Right.
I think so sort of this pipeline effort and making sure that we do that in a way, right? If we're talking about global engagement in this kind of thing, a way that's efficient does have to be under the hood. But the outcome of this is really, really, really powerful. And I don't think people really realize that as soon as this is in effect, we get a level of information we've never had.
Right. Sal, what organization are you with? Or I've not met you before, so sorry.
You have not. I am brand new. So hello to everyone who I haven't met, who is everyone except Axe. So I'm new to Sonatype. So this is my first month with them, but I come from a background in actually machine learning. And I just spent the last 10 years working in basically security clearance with, US Air Force, NIH. Pretty familiar with working on problems in this kind of area. But now that I've stepped out of that, I'm trying to save the world. And this is one of these save the world.
I love it. Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Kay, for putting this together. And also, yes, I noticed that we have a couple of new faces today, so I apologize for not doing intros at the beginning. This is the problem with me having 8 a.m. meetings. My brain's not quite all there yet. But so one of the things, Kay, that you mentioned in here was creating a working group. And one of the things that I've thought about with this is, should we create a working group dedicated to this, or should we leverage the TAC in our role as influencers of the technical strategy within OpenSSF? Because a lot of these pieces, as you went through it, clearly fall in existing working groups that we have, but they would need to be coordinated, right? We've got tooling, we've got best practices, right? We've got securing critical projects. Like these, they all kind of have a piece of this pie. And so what makes more sense? Do we create another working group that's kind of a oversight, almost committee-like, that's responsible for coordination of these things as it relates to executive order? Or do we just simply leverage the TAC for that? I don't particularly have a preference either way. To kind of throw this out to the group for discussion and thoughts of what you folks think.
Just as a quick reminder, I mean, on the way, I don't vote on any of these things, but hopefully you let me you let me talk. I'm not looking for new working groups to be a member of. So if we can add it to existing work of different existing working groups, I think it would be easier than trying to divide up people into yet more groups. I think there's a point at which, unless we have too many people, too many working groups can kind of dilute. But I guess I have to also repeat what Ryan said. I don't really care in the broad scheme. Let's identify the most important things and work them. Then, and however we organize, I'll work with. But I do think we have to be careful about creating too many working groups, and then there's we're spending all our time meeting instead of working.
I definitely agree with that.
I will say though, trying to attend as many work groups as possible, that this is my main complaint. Any one working group is no one has the big picture, and I'm blown away by what Kay's presented today. And if there is leadership who's willing to lead a group, I think that should eliminate a lot of obstacles for us going forward with the group. I'd love to see some. It can even be a short-term working group. It can have a duration of produce this material and get the working groups to coordinate, then disband. But I'd love to have somebody address exactly what's being shown right now, the big picture, and probably creating a roadmap and making sure all the work groups know where they're at on the roadmap and what deliverables are expected to produce against that roadmap. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, and Matt, that's a great point. And what you just stated is exactly what the role of the TAC is meant to be. So we have spent a lot of time in the past, like as a new organization, just getting our processes in place and working with the existing 6 working groups. And we tried to build this technical vision. We did that. And then now it's time to kind of, rubber meet the road kind of situation where that's all great. Things are running. And now this is exactly what we need to do. So we've had on the agenda, like reviewing a backlog of things, this giant document that David has graciously put together of all the ideas that we've had. And then this executive order came out and we're like, okay, maybe we should rally around this. And then, Kay has put this together, which is phenomenal, and definitely will help coordinate all that. So if we want to work off of this and the TAC can drive this as sort of the strategy that we want to target and coordinate with those working groups, we know what the vision is and who needs to do what work and then help provide that. That's precisely what we're supposed to be doing.
I just worry about the bandwidth agendas, and the ability to focus on this topic and not reactionary to things that come out in the press or executive orders or work group reviews and quarterly reports and things like that.
Yeah, like this group was already looking at supply chain security as sort of an overarching strategy. And then when the executive order came out, it sort of solidified some of the key points, right? So I think the executive order sort of just happened to land with what we were already kind of thinking and then just expanded on it. So I agree, like we shouldn't be just, chasing every new thing that comes out. This one just happened to fit with where we were already thinking.
If we're just tossing out ideas, and we had discussed early on when the digital identity attestation group came out, we talked about maybe the scope of that working group could be broader to encompass supply chain. So that might be another way to go, is maybe think about taking an existing working group, maybe kind of expanding its scope a little, and then we could, keep the number of meetings that we all have limited, which I totally agree with, David. And also, anyway, but that's just one idea. So we're open to thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually agree with that, because I think if you look at the digital identity attestation working group, the security and critical projects working group, I know they've been looking a lot lately for agenda topics, which kind of seems like maybe they're striving for a sense of direction. This could be that direction that kind of helps drive that. so we could propose these on the agenda. I don't know if Kay, if you want to drive this, or we could talk to Dan and Kim and see how they feel about incorporating this and making it more of a central theme within those working groups, and then how they can coordinate with the other ones. Because I agree, I'd rather leverage what we have and then just try to expand on it rather than creating something entirely new and then trying to coordinate again. And whatever role the TAC can play in helping to coordinate that, that's why we're here. So, we'll do that, and we can start getting these leads, hopefully showing up at the TAC meetings that we've been trying to do for the past few months to help coordinate as well. But I think this is a great way personally to drive a lot of these working groups forward and give them a sense of coordination and collaboration and all that, all those great buzzwords. So
is it fair to say that we can take this as a high level checklist as is being shown and perhaps ask and engage each of the work groups is to have them clearly state what they're working on relative to this list, the software supply chain, and then have that as an artifact that this TAC maintains and produces and creates checkpoints against?
yeah, I think that's a reasonable plan. I don't think we should try to present it as sort of like that we're dictating what work they should do, rather than I think most of them are already in agreement on focusing on supply chain security. And so now just kind of coming and working with the leads and saying, hey, like, we've got this overarching view. This is, what OpenSSF is going to target over the next year. How can we make your working groups fit into that work? And then let them build their sort of list rather than us dictating it to them. But
Well, I don't see,
essentially, yes, I agree with you. Just maybe.
It's good. No, it's good for them to understand. I think a lot of work groups don't, and the membership they don't understand this overarching thing.
Right.
So it's good to have that as an artifact to place in front of them and have the work group chairs and work groups acknowledge if they have things that apply to this, what they are, and know that they should report on them regularly for newsletters and whatnot.
Agreed. Yeah. So I think maybe the right approach, maybe going forward here, is myself and Kay and David and whoever else wants to be involved. We can kind of create this basic strategy, have a meeting with the leads to help coordinate all of this and figure out what next steps for their each working group should be. And then we can kind of resync and start getting into sort of a rhythm of business where we start having these checkpoints and figuring out where everybody wants to tie in. Kate, does that sound like a reasonable approach for you to move this forward?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll set something up hopefully soon. Just FYI, I will be in and out. I'm got my honeymoon coming up, so I'll try to do as much as I can in the meantime. But we'll get that started, and I think that'll help drive a lot of progress. But in the interest of time, David, I don't know how long you needed to go through. I know we only have 7 minutes left. We can leverage this time for you to give your presentation or discussion, or we can just kind of wrap up here and save it for another time if you need more time.
I don't need more time. I think mine's really straightforward. So shall we just go for it?
Take it away.
Take it away. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen. Let's see if that works. Maybe it works. All right, it is giving me the illusion that it worked. Okay, so Ryan asked me to, I shared out to the TAC my usual oversight process, and Ryan said, "Oh, that sounds like something other people should know about. You should talk a little bit about it." So here I am. So I wrote a one-page doc. I have the link in the notes here. Actually, I probably should stick this also in the chat. Let's see here, chat. All right. So that's the doc that I'm going to be talking about. All right. In the chat is a link to it. So basically, if whenever the LF funds security-focused work, including any of its foundations like the OpenSSF, typically there's some oversight. It's not a requirement, but often I end up being the person doing a lot of the oversight. I oversee a number of little projects, some OpenSSF related, some not, but regardless of that. So I wrote up this one page that explains, by default, if I'm overseeing it and we don't make any changes, what happens? So first up, I do make it clear, most of the times, most security work is being done by other folks. I mean, either by volunteers or somebody not some organization, not the LF itself, funds an employee, say, and they go do something, and that's great. Okay, don't need to do anything. But if the LF or an LF project or a foundation like the OpenSSF funds work, this is and if you ask, if I end up being the person overseeing the work, this is what typically happens. An exception, security audits are actually pretty similar but somewhat different. I also oversee OSTIF when they get engaged for a number of things. But other than that, here's what typically happens. All right, first of all, there's usually a contract. What happens? Funds set aside. It's approved. It's funded. They have to send a LF a little personal information because of taxes. And then what? Basically, it's pretty straightforward. What I ask people to do is every month or some other period, they email out an invoice. Hey, please pay me. And you link to, here's the key, a stable URL that's publicly accessible that tells the world some stuff about what you did with the money. So basically, briefly, what's been accomplished, why it's important, give credit, provide some identifier. Now, the identifier doesn't have to be your personal name. It just has to be something because that helps make it clear what it is. As far as what's been accomplished, we want them to point off to details, but usually a lot of folks, for example, they're going to write code. We want them to point to the get commits. Doesn't have to be in there. Please don't need to copy paste. Just have links to your get commits. The whole process is intended to be lightweight. I tell people it shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes. And remember that if it's funded this way, you have to release stuff under an open technology license, like an open source software license. And then, if it seems like, progress is getting, people, there's actual reasonable efforts, then they get funded. We expect problems are going to happen sometimes. We just want to see credible efforts. And if there's a real roadblock, we want them to suggest ways to overcome it or provide some partial or incremental benefits. The overall goal of this is to provide confidence to funders we aren't wasting money. And really, a broader thing, which is noted up here, we want people to consider funding open source software security as normal. We want to normalize that. So the more that people post, oh, look, here's what we did, the more people start seeing that, well, oh, wait a minute, I could do that too. And, that helps the OpenSSF and lots of other folks too. So anyway, this wasn't supposed to be complicated. It's supposed to be simple, but hopefully it kind of makes sense. Questions? I will note, by the way, I've only had one person push back. Most of the folks I work with say, oh yeah, this makes sense, and off we go. So, so in general, I haven't had any pushback on this process, but it'd be useful to, more publicly, what in the world is this? What is this that's going on? Okay.
I think this is great. Thank you, David. It seems very straightforward too, so I don't have any questions, but I like the process. But
it's supposed to be. I mean, I'm the one that receives all this stuff, so I don't want to read a million pages of stuff. And really, my hope, because it's all public, my hope is, again, we want to normalize this whole, oh yeah, look, this is funded, and OpenSSF is funding this, and things are happening. So anyway, that's the hope. Okay, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right, folks, any last minute questions? We have 1 minute left before we need to wrap up. So make it quick. No.
I guess on my part, so to be in touch with everyone, I've got the Slack. Is there anywhere else that I should be looking to connect on things aside from these meetings?
Slack, these meetings, a lot of conversations also happen on GitHub, and then the mailing lists. So join any working group mailing list, the TAC mailing list that you might be interested in. So yeah, between those channels, you should pretty much get everything covered. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. All right, thanks everyone, and thank you to our new attendees. I'm happy to have you guys here. So looking forward to having you again, and we'll talk in 2 weeks. All right, thanks everyone. Bye.
Sounds great.
care.
Thanks.